thank you for getting up to be with us this morning. To this morning's panel, just to give you a little idea of how this morning is going to work. Our panel is scheduled to go until 10 o'clock, and we hope that that gives us an opportunity to engage one another and have some conversations with you participating. And then we're going to go right into the second panel, which is a panel focused on the Me Too movement. So there'll be, there won't be, usually there's a sort of elaborate changeover a little bit, but we're going to go right into that for the sake of time and getting everyone over to the film this afternoon. So keep that in mind. My name is Eric Pearson, and this morning's panel is presented by the Alliance for Inclusion and Respect. And I think that more so than any of the panels, this one directly allows us the opportunity to talk about the ways in which film produces empathy, which is one of the themes that Roger champions in terms of us understanding the way that film works. I want to thank the Alliance for their sponsorship. If you haven't looked in your program, this is a pamphlet that is in all the programs that you get over at the Virginia, and it talks about the number of organizations that are part of the Alliance, and it is really highlights, I think, the need within the community, and also sort of the depth of the services that come to folks through the Alliance. So I really would encourage you to take a look at that. I wanted to actually start with a quote from a book, believe it or not, written on paper. This comes from, believe it or not, Chris Matthews' book, A Raging Spirit, which is about Robert Kennedy. But he opens the book and he writes, long ago came to realize that movies are always about the present. It doesn't matter whether the wardrobe is Elizabethan or cowboy. The story is told by and for the living, those who'll be there to see it. And I thought this, when I read it, I thought this is really what movies can do for us, to help us to understand the world in the present. So what I'd like to do is start off by having the panelists sort of introduce themselves, because we have a wide variety. We have professionals, we have filmmaker, we have folks that have worked in the industry, and my job is going to be to bring all of these folks together around a central theme, and I think I can do that. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, Barb?
I'm Barb Bressner, and I am a consultant with the Champaign County Mental Health and Developmental Disability Boards.
I'm Barry Allen. I worked for 24 years at Paramount Pictures. Most of that time was spent in the area of preservation and restoration, which is a job that's never finished. But I'm also a huge proponent of the idea that the entertainment arts, and they are arts, should be taught so that we have a literacy for viewing and judging the media that we watch. And films and plays and television all fit into that, and I think they should be taught equally with poetry and written literature.
Hi, my name is Julie Dash, and I'm an independent filmmaker who sometimes works in Hollywood. I've made a bunch of films, Rosa Parks' Story, Funny Valentine's, Love Song, it's Incognito, but the film that's playing here at the festival this year is Daughters of the Dust.
Hello, I'm Richard Laskowski. I'm retired from the university. I was the last director of the Unit for Cinema Studies before it was rolled into the Department of Media and Cinema Studies. And I've been writing film reviews and feature columns for the News Gazette for 39 years.
I am Joe Omosage. I do not do any of those things. I'm a counselor at Parkland and also on the Champaign County Mental Health Board.
I'm Todd Rindelman, and I teach film history at Seattle Pacific University in Seattle, Washington.
Hi, my name is Karen Sims, and I'm wearing two hats. So I do training and consulting around trauma and trauma-informed care, and I am the coordinator of our community's effort to build a trauma-informed community called CU Peace and Resiliency Champions.
Okay, thank you. And I'm Eric Pearson. I am professor of communication studies and the director of the film minor at the University of San Diego. In San Diego, California. So I wanted to throw this question out to you all and have you address it. What role does film play in helping you do what you do in terms of either counseling or what do you see as the role of film in helping people understand the other, understand the experiences of the other, and if you have some specific films that you've maybe used in your professional life that you say, hey, this has been really sort of very effective and very helpful in helping me deal with those issues. So we can start in any order that you like.
So I'm gonna not hog space, but Daughters of the Dust is my all-time favorite film, so I'm gonna confess that. And so I gotta change my password, it just occurred to me. So now everyone knows. But for me, when I saw the film as a African-American woman coming from the South, it provided an opportunity for my story to be seen on the screen that I hadn't seen. So I come from a legacy of, at that time I had found out that I had had 18 family members who had been impacted by HIV and AIDS. And when I thought about my family's legacy from Mississippi to Florida, it, for some reason, articulated a way that we could heal and recover that I had never seen visualized. And so when I thought about historical trauma, it was the way to, and so I introduced it that way. And on a personal level, I will tell you, I got married and struggled with infertility for a really long time. And I'd always believed that Daughters of the Dust spoke to me in some way personally. And we went to Edisto as a part of a honeymoon gift that my in-laws gave me, and I got pregnant the first day. And if you ever see my daughter, and Chandra can tell you, she looks like the daughter in the film. And so I always thought that she came visiting to me. And so it is being able to see those kind of stories visualized in a way that connects not only just the story in, sometimes we always go to Africa, but we have a narrative in the United States about healing and recovery and community and passage that we don't tell a lot. And so that to me is where art can sort of reflect and heal.
Thank you. Well, to follow up, wow. In making and designing and writing Daughters of the Dust, I've always been a fan of foreign films. Because when I was coming up in high school and watching foreign films and not having traveled or even being able to travel because I came from a modest income family, I always felt that foreign films took me somewhere. It took me out of my comfort zone. It took me into a new world. And coming out of the theater, I felt like I had traveled. And I wanted to share that kind of experience with African American culture to the general public. Because I was going to the movies and I wasn't having that nurturing feeling fed to me by the films that were out at the time. So at UCLA, I designed it to speak to social elements and legacy and the whole feelings of the psychology of nostalgia and scrapbooking and all of those things I kind of wove into the structure and fabric of this non-linear story. And thank you. So I was trying to touch a a part of myself and the public, and to show that this particular story that some people found non-accessible because it was so African American, it basically speaks to everyone's family, universal. The universal urge to growth and change and to travel and to leave home and to return and all of those kinds of things. Since I know I'm babbling, but there's a lot to unpack there.
You know, I knew I wasn't going to be here tomorrow afternoon when Julie's film gets shown, so I watched it Monday before I left for the festival. And I knew it would be good because they don't show bad films here. But I wasn't prepared for how much the film would move me. Now here, and it is a very exotic film for someone like me, but I kept seeing things that I could relate to because it's about family, it's about past, it's about the future, it's about things that affect us all. And it also reminded me a little bit of Ozu's film, Tokyo Story.
Thank you.
Anyhow, try not to miss it. It's also a gorgeously photographed film, but it is very moving. And I want to mention a film that came to mind. In fact, Eric and I talked about it a couple days ago. There's a film that many of you have seen because it's been around a long time, made in 1946, called The Best Years of Our Lives. Yeah. Okay, now here's a film. This is a good example of a film that communicated to the general American public, those who had not actually been in the services, and they did a good job of representing all the services. These men come back to their hometown. They've come from all strata of that society, and they come bonded, and their challenge is they're not bonded at this point in time with their community and their families because of that, the intervening time in the war. And this film, every person, not just Harold Russell, who was a young man who had lost both his hands, and I think that might have been the first time a person with that disability had been portrayed in a major film. But that spread, the handicap spread out across all of the characters had some type of issue to overcome and reintegrate with their civilian lives. And I think that is a wonderful example where the combination of, you know, a commercial film trying to speak to the general public, the people at home, the home front.
I'm at a loss for words. I mean, being here with all of you. However, I also teach a Psychology 101 class, and I know I use a lot of film clips for teaching to illustrate different aspects of our existence. I think the ideas of family, the ideas of society and community, and looking at individualism versus communal living and things like that. And I think too many times, if we are not willing to use what many of our young people see on a daily basis, they have their phones and they can see those things very readily, we lose them. And I think, I wouldn't say I'm a master teacher, but I try to illustrate what I see in text and in theory with movies and clips from things like you've all talked about.
And I have to say that we've, well, at the University of Illinois, we've used Daughters of the Dust for many years in, as a core film in one of our basic introductory film courses. And then it shows up in other courses with more specific titles. Because, I mean, there's just so much that one can say about it, and so many approaches that it allows one to get into different. Oh, I'm sorry. plus this frog in my throat doesn't help. It allows an instructor to help the students get into film from so many different directions. It's an African American film. It's a film by a woman director. It's about a culture that they would have had no connection with before, and it's a different way of storytelling from what they're familiar with.
Thank you to film schools. A lot of people say, of course you don't have to go to film school to become a filmmaker, but having started studying film in high school at the Studio Museum of Harlem, getting a film undergraduate degree at CCNY, spending 2 years at the American Film Institute's Conservatory, and then 4 years postgraduate work at UCLA. All of this, it was exciting for us to make the film, to work with the psychology of color, the psychology of music, of movement, structure, and all of these things that, like I was free to do it because I was young, and a lot of these things don't even come up with filmmakers who are just trying to make something very commercial. We weren't trying to do a commercial film, we were experimenting to see what we could do, and to share new visions and a new world.
Yeah, children are exposed to film at such an early age too, and it does it sinks in. As a coordinator for the annual Disability Resource Expo that we do here in our community, actually for East Central Illinois, this year for the first time we used film in the children's room. And relating, of course, to disabilities, we showed the film Dory. And because the characters in that film, I think there are 4 different characters in that film that have disabilities of some sort. And so it was kind of neat to see the kids' response to that and how they, engage in that. So I just, I also, I haven't seen the film yet. I'm anxious to see it. But I have an African-American child. And I'm looking forward to sitting down with her to see that. She is a big film buff, and so that's one of the things we do as a family is go to movies, and so it does. It really affects the kids, and that from very early on. So,
Todd, did you have any?
Yeah, I want to thank Julie Dash for generating the most provocative conversations in the intro to film courses in the United States for the past quarter century. I've always taught Daughters of the Dust. I actually use it as a bridge to foreign films and so forth. We can show them American films, and students often don't realize how wed they are to the conventions of classical Hollywood cinema until they encounter a film like Daughters of the Dust. So thank you for your work here. I can tell you one way that I try to connect to it myself and build bridges with students is my great-grandmother was fortunate enough to have her memoirs published when she was 96 years old. Her life spanned the entire 20th century. And her book was called All Anybody Ever Wanted Out of Me Was to Work, the memoirs of Edith Bradley Rindleman. And that was published by Southern Illinois University Press. And she was a farm woman, and it was mostly about her life in the first 50 years of the 20th century, what it was like being a farm woman in Southern Illinois. But at the end of that book, she created this appendix, which was this extraordinary family tree of my whole history. And then where I came, at the very lower end of it. And it was this elaborate tree, which I learned a lot from myself because I didn't understand all the connections and the relations within our own family and where everybody came from. And what I do is I'll put that up on the board when we talk about daughters, because that's what's in Nana's head. I mean, she understands all the relationships among her family, and there's this tremendous urgency on her part that information is going to be lost if people go to the mainland, and she's terrified of that and that loss of identity. And so a visual image like that, I find is helpful for them to understanding a little bit about the movie, and then maybe even a little bit about myself too.
And I will say we we showed the film to some high school students. I went to Urbana High, which is Rogers' alma mater, and we had about 65, 70 high school students, sit and watch the film. And I was a little bit nervous, are they going to get it, and how are they going to? And I have to say, they understood the loneliness part in a way that I was not expecting, and that they sort of this idea of fear of change, and it was interesting because that would have never been a place that me personally would have entered the film, but it was a way in which they entered the film and took some things away from it. And that leads me to my next question, which is when you use film or present film, how much framing do you do? Or do you just let people enter it in their own way? Or is it, particularly the professionals who've used film, on the dory, do you let whatever happens, or do you try to figure out a way to guide them just a little bit?
Well, I think that depending on what the film is and what it deals with, and sort of what level of student you're dealing with, that sort of determines how much you're going to frame it, what sorts of what sorts of spoiler alerts you might provide the students. Certainly, if a film is outside the general Hollywood narrative pattern, you want to alert them to that. And if it is about a very specific sort of marginalized community, you want to provide, some sort of background to that, so that they're not, totally lost as 5 minutes into the film, because it's something that's totally alien to them. So you do need some sort of setup, a bit of background, but without giving away too much. You want to leave some questions unanswered, arouse some curiosity in the students before they see the film going into it, because if that background is lacking, then it's going to take them a while to identify with the characters.
So in an introductory psychology class, I think you're doing so many different introductions into different aspects of psychology. So let's say it's going to be about mental disorders in any way. So showing a movie like, I can't even come up with a name right now, but just leaving it out there and then having them have a reaction to it and saying, okay, you would have an oral reaction, but also I would like to hear your own personal reaction on your own by writing a page. What's your summary of this movie? How did it touch you? What happened? Don't give me don't tell me the story. We all saw the story, but what did it mean to you?
I had an experience a few weeks ago. A friend of mine teaches law at Notre Dame, and he teaches a course about law and lawyers in film. So he gives me one class every semester. He teaches it. This time we did something a little bit different. We showed Casablanca. That was this class pick the night before. Now you think of that as kind of a potboiler picture, but the more you watch it, the more you learn about the people in the picture. Almost everybody in that film was a refugee from the Nazis. And we did, we gave them a little bit of setup of things to kind of look out for when we ran it. We actually ran it in their theater. We didn't run it in a classroom. But then the next day at the class, I had about 5 clips, and then we did the analysis after they had seen the film all the way through. And I think the best clip that I like the most, because I think it says a lot about how you can make a film better is a tiny little scene that you could cut out, nobody would miss it. Most of you have seen it. It's the one where the old couple are learning to speak English, and it adds a little dimension that just somehow creates the background for the, and adds just a touch of depth. It's a typical example of a scene that somehow makes something towards the whole. I can't quite explain it, but the particular scene touches me every time I see it. And almost all those actors, many of whom were Hungarians, not only Germans, and almost none of them spoke English when they got to this country. They had all come from the theater, and they all, by the time they were working, were speaking excellent English. But I've thought about a lot of them probably went through that process of assimilation that this elderly couple are going through. And I think that is one of the things that's nice about being able to review something with clips after you've seen the whole film.
I would agree with you. I would agree with him because it's what I call the tiny specifics that adds resonance and layers to the story. These little tiny specifics that you will put throughout a film that seen alone individually, maybe it's not that strong, but it starts to build upon itself, and then it just adds this feeling of familiarity and resonance and cognizance.
I think it also speaks to just that oftentimes you have to experience something more than once, because stuck in the corners of the film, there are these powerful statements which you might not see. When I watched the film yesterday, Daughters of the Dust, it occurred to me for the first time that Yellow Mary's partner has no dialogue. And so her pain was just so much more real. It was just, and again, Todd and I both taught the film a lot at the University of Illinois here because we use it a lot, so very familiar. But it was the first time that I had actually, a film that I had a lot of experience with, but in those corners are where those powerful things are. I wanted to ask Bob and Karen, you were talking about using films. Have you ever used a film and it didn't go where you wanted it to go? It went someplace else. and how do you get that back around to where you need it to go?
Two things. One is the question around framing, I think, is important because, again, I talk a lot about trauma, and I think one of the powerful things about film when it's used effectively, and you can see those moments, is it moves you from sort of prefrontal cortex like thinking to having a visceral emotional experience, right? When you downshift and you can open up heart space, that's the powerful of a film. And you can see, like, sometimes a movie can show the same scenes, but they invite you to join them, right? Heart. And so there are times where, because of issues of maybe cross-cultural issues, or I was anticipating, like, because there's some age dynamics, like, that there would be times where we do training a lot around trying to get people in the community, understand community violence and narratives and those kinds of things. And there will be times where we use a tool to help create a sense of community or understanding, shared vision or understanding. And it doesn't elicit the compassion, but maybe it elicits anger. Or as you would say, like, what people locate or connect with is, I'm gonna say, like, I love Daughters, but I'm gonna say recently we've we tend to show the 13th as a part of what we train on, and I am amazed at the range of experiences that I can get from the 13th. Normally we can talk through and massage people to where we want to go, but when I show it to young people who are living the experience, who have not thought about those issues, there is rage. When I show it to older people or community people or people who are compassionate, there is intellectual understanding and some intellectualizing of things. But if you, again, I recently showed it to people who were formerly incarcerated, and the tears and the grief and the loss and the feeling like frustration about systems that didn't tell them their story. So I guess I want to say, Lee, yes, there are times where we use film and the intended purpose isn't the outcome we receive. One other example is Fire Inside, because we're talking about it. So when I saw Fire Inside, I thought it was a great, based on my experience of working with people with mood disorders, I thought it captured things well, and people I've worked with who told me it captured their story well. But when I have partners view it, when I give it as a partner, they don't come away with the same understanding and compassion, but people who live it go, this is a good reflection of me, and people on the external only sometimes see it, they can't get the empathy piece that I hope. So it's this interesting dance between intent and purpose, and I always think having space to talk about things, that's why I think film should be watched in community, because you can massage some of those nuance and details.
Barb, did you want to? Yep. All right, good. Okay. So we've talked a lot about family, and I'd like to have you talk about the role of families in helping folks to deal with some of these things, because families are they're this wonderful site of support and care and nurturing. They're also this wonderful side of frustration and disappointment, and it's interesting about sort of the role of families as working through some of the things that you have to deal with. How do you use the role of family, and how, particularly in a film like Daughters of the Dust, the family is so important to help each other work through the trauma of moving and that sort of thing. So, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I guess I can relate, in my personal life with that. My daughter was severely abused prior to age 2, and just last year learned her story. And talking to her about that, it's been quite a challenge. And explaining to her about her previous family and her family now, that's just been a real hard thing. We saw actually recently, I Can Only Imagine. And of course, serious abuse is a part of that film. We were a little iffy about whether she was ready to see that, but I think she was. We sat through that, and we had some really nice discussions afterwards. She's a child that doesn't show emotion real readily, but yet in that film she did. You could tell it really, it was making some points to her, and so film in that way, I think, was a really good thing to help tell a story, to help that individual understand maybe their background, their story.
Anyone else want to weigh in?
Yeah. In looking at family with mental health, and I think one of the things that even with the mental health board, using film is something that sometimes we still have conversations about, that it doesn't reach the right population. However, what film does for families is it brings you together in one spot, and you watch it, and then you can talk about it. I know with my two young men, my sons, 14-year-old and 11-year-old, that's one way in which we broach subjects that are sometimes uncomfortable about issues of race. I mean, I know I'm having my 14-year-old come to 13 with me tomorrow, because I want him to say, those are conversations we have constantly. And I think if we choose not to expose our families and our communities to things that we're uncomfortable with, we would stay where we are. And I think one of the things that many of the movies like Daughters of Dust and even The Color Purple do is bring us to an understanding of what it is that we as a society sometimes are uncomfortable with. Because we're uncomfortable with it doesn't mean we don't talk about it. And I think that's one of the issues with race that we have within the larger society. We talk about it academically, but we don't want to talk about it emotionally. And so we're afraid to do it. Like sexuality also. We are a very sexualized society, but we don't really talk about a lot of the minutiae of what sexuality is. And so until we get to the point where we're able to have comfortable conversations about all these issues that make us uncomfortable, we would remain where we are. And we've got to challenge it. And film does that for us. It gives us a topic to talk about and how to talk about it.
I want to be respectful. One of the things I will say about that Daughters of the Dust that I've actually used with people about family is about the change process. You know, so there's this concept in families that you want to differentiate. So like the how do you move forward and stay attached, right? So that differentiation process happens for all of us. And I thought the movie did such a good job of talking about the cost of differentiation. So we're in a semi-rural community, and so farmers who leave go to the city or go to the university experience that tension between am I disloyal if I make this step? If I'm working with young adults from a primarily urban environment who are deciding to go to college, how is it that they give themselves permission to leave home, right? And so when I think about that cost of family, like what does it mean? What parts of your story can you keep with you? How does it anchor and ground you? So, right, that's the beautiful part that anchors you, but also how is it that you can move forward without losing all of that, right? The tension. And I thought the movie articulated that tension about differentiation, the cost, the benefits, the price for families so well. And so I think anytime we're sort of moving into our own healing or new narratives or new experiences, it does mean changing our relationship with families, and we need support for that and spaces to talk about that.
Yeah, because I imagine that can be a really difficult thing, right, to deal. It's you have the outside world, but you also have those people that you care about. Julie, I had a question. How do you feel Daughters of the Dust has aged over the last 20? Because you know, this is a very powerful film that not enough people saw 25 years ago, but it seems as if people are going back to it and being drawn to it in a different way. And I just wanted to hear from you how you think the film have we changed, or how has the film started to speak to us in different ways?
In many ways, the world has changed and the culture has changed, and after not MTV, music videos came out, people have a whole new way of accepting visuals that are non-linear, let's say. And I think with cable stations and streaming video, more people are seeing foreign films. And so I think the structure is not so other to this new generation. So with the restored version of Daughters of the Dust coming out in, I think it was 2016, a whole new group of people were taking a look at it for the very first time. And their reactions were different than in 1991. When we first screened at Sundance Film Festival. We won Best Cinematography at Sundance, but then people would say, let's not even talk about it. At the after parties in Sundance, they would say, let's not even talk about it. they didn't want to get into it because it was like too much to unpack. It was just, they wanted a simple urban male testosterone film. That's what was happening at the time. That's what was playing, you know, that was what was trending. And because it came out the same year as some other very famous films, like, no, it came out the same year as Juice and, and Straight Outta Brooklyn, which won the Jury Award, the People's Award, Choice Awards. And they were, and so I think it was a shock to the system, the entire system of filmmakers. You know, here is this African-American film that they did not understand completely, and some people said, well, why didn't you do a documentary about the Gullah Geechee first? And it's like, why do I have to do a documentary? Just watch it. So I think this whole new generation, it's something different. So I'm so pleased that it's had a long life. It has never been out of distribution. And it's taken me around the world, and I've learned a lot from it. But at this point, to tell you the truth, it's almost like it's an old friend, but I don't feel ownership towards it. You know, it's just like, it is that thing over there, you know.
Julie, did you specifically, because the color is one of the things that people have talked about, but it has to work in the service of the story. Did you have specific things that you did with color?
Absolutely. We tested a lot of film stocks over the years prior to shooting Daughters of the Dusk. And we decided to use a German film stock that, you know, of course, they don't make anymore. It was Agfa, Evert negative, and everything is digital now. And then my key color was indigo blue, because it speaks to the work and the processing, the growing and processing of the indigo dyes that were used during the time. And everyone, of course, you know, going with the wind as the paradigm of Southern culture. It's always cotton is king, but really it's the indigo and rice. You know, Hollywood created the whole cotton thing.
And that's why your central character is dressed differently from the others.
Yes, she's.
That grabbed me.
Yes.
Yeah, and
absolutely.
Speaking of indigo, I mean, that's a very West African color. I mean, growing up in Lagos, Nigeria, indigo and the colors in that scheme were always part of our culture. And going back to family and looking back over,
exactly,
it's still part of it. Makes that connection.
And in the larger world, the color indigo has these spiritual qualities to it. You know?
So I want to ask one more question to the panel, but also, if you have questions, the mic is there, so you can go ahead and line up if you have a question. It's right there. But given that this idea of films as a way to generate empathy, to sort of share the life of another in some sort in with this emotional connection, can you all give me a film that you would like to share with the people and say, this is sort of a gift that I'd like to give to you as something that you can embrace and connect with someone who may be very different from yourself. So Karen, I'll put you on the spot down at the end there.
I was like, I actually need a minute, so.
Okay. All right. Who doesn't need a minute? Todd, you ready to go?
Okay. Well, I'm going to encourage everyone to come out as well tomorrow for a film called Ramblin' Rose. And this is a movie that really speaks to the power of families and adoptive families as well. And there is a really gorgeous scene in this movie where Laura Dern is playing a character, and she's really gaining tremendously in confidence, and she marches downtown. The concept of the male gaze has been talked about a lot in the last few months even. It isn't now limited to academic conversations. And the sequence in the film is where she goes downtown and the camera kind of lovingly follows her, and it's in love with her body as well as she marches forward. It clearly is an example of the male gaze. But it's so creative and dynamic, and it suggests of how she's growing in her own esteem and forcefulness, that it's just a good example how even the most sort of kind of threadbare or predictable conventions are only as predictable as the filmmaker who puts them to use. It's a really lovely film and a great scene.
Okay. Barry? Okay.
I have a film that,
Anybody? Go ahead, man.
I have a film that I want to show and get a conversation going on. I'm having a little trouble getting people that could do this with me interested in the film, and not because it's they don't like the film. They think it would be difficult and controversial, and that is John Ford's The Searchers, which I think is his great late masterpiece. But you've got to see it a few times, and there's a lot of stuff hidden in there. We could talk about that someday, all day long. Yeah. But I think too, at the time in which it was made, 1956, the civil rights movement was just, I think, boiling, getting to that point. The film technically is about the racism between the white and the Indians, but writers and critics that I have read often feel this was a way of getting into the whole spectrum of racism in general without getting into the problems they would have if they were dealing, not the Indians, that was all past, so they could get away with dealing with that subject. But it really, Eric and I talked about the Oxbow incident, which is really a lot more than just about cowboys. And these films were films that the filmmakers wanted to make. The Oxbow incident was made only because William Wellman agreed to make a terrible picture called Buffalo Bill. It's an interesting film, but it wasn't a true picture of that particular subject. But he did it so that he could get Zanuck to let him do the Oxbow incident, because Zanuck did not want to do the film.
Well,
Julie.
The Searchers had a profound effect upon my life. I remember the day I was sitting on my couch in the living room watching TV and seeing The Searchers, and it was profoundly disturbing. But the film that I would like to share with everyone is, it's a German film called The Lives of Others, and it's about the Stasi. And I really connected with that film because it's, the politics of the government, to me it was like symbolic of Hollywood, telling you what you could make in terms of artists, what they can do and can't do, and who they should associate with. And I don't know how many times I've seen that film, but it's good.
Well, my area of research is animation, so I'll toss out an animated film for you. It was recently nominated for an Academy Award but didn't win. It's called The Breadwinner, and it's about an Iranian girl who is the daughter of a teacher who is no longer allowed to teach. She has to translate letters and things for people, sort of at a stand out in the street. And once he gets hauled away by the government forces, there's no one to support the family, because women are not allowed to work. They're not allowed to even go out on the street unaccompanied by a man. So I believe she's 12 years old. The daughter has to dress up like a boy in order to go out and get water for the family and to earn money, and she sort of follows in her father's footsteps of acting as a translator for hire. And the film follows her efforts to try to find her father in prison and to get the family out of the particular dangerous area that they're in. I mean, it's a really well done film, and I highly recommend it.
I can't come up with one.
Karen?
Okay, So I did, and this is one that got lots of critical acclaim, but I don't feel like it landed in the community. So I work a lot with educators, and I wish I could get more people to see Moonlight and have critical conversations about Moonlight, because for the young people that I work with, it is the best accurate reflection of what so many urban youth live, go through, struggle with on a real personal level. And I don't feel like enough people have seen it for real. Like, you know, like you can see it as a cinematography, like as a movie, but not as a real authentic story. And I would like us to also talk about the community values that getting the right create that, but also we haven't talked about the resiliency and the things that exist in Moonlight that showed what helps people survive. And so I want us to talk more about resiliency and protective factors in communities, even communities that are distressed. And so Moonlight would be my one that I would hope more people would talk about and see.
Okay. Barb, do you have one for us? No, not. Well, it's, you know, if I was going to share one film, and this is a film that oftentimes I think the power of a film is not how you feel about it at the moment, but it's about how long it rattles around inside, and you can't, you know, you can't shake it because it's still in there. And I haven't seen The Men in probably 25 years, which is a film that's Marlon Brando and Jack Webb focus on veterans returning from World War II in a hospital, trying to learn how to walk again and those kinds of things. And when I saw it, I'd never understood broken bodies and the way in which people struggle to make themselves as whole as they possibly can, and the psychology of that and the struggle of that. And it just has stayed with me. I just, you know, it's one of those, when I say it, when I mention the film, most people haven't seen it, but if you get a chance, with Marlon Brando and Jack Webb before Dragnet, which is just, he turns into just an amazing performance. So I wanted to open it up for questions. If you might have any questions, you gotta step up to the mic there. Oh, go ahead, Chaz. Okay.
Just one thing. Thank you this morning for the panel. Something that you said is tremendously important. Joseph, when you talked about showing a film, and what the subject matter is, or how the film is presented, you don't necessarily preach or lecture about it beforehand. You let them absorb it, and then you ask, how do they perceive it? Write about what it means to you. And the reason that that's important to me in putting the film festival together, I wrestle with, especially in more recent years when I became more aware of the work that the Alliance for Inclusion and Respect does. And when we talk about sometimes presenting something that doesn't stigmatize a mental disorder or a different way of life that some people may feel they, you know, may have been discriminated against by society or for. It's really, you know, we struggle with that because you know that you can present something, what Roger used to say, a film is not what it's about, but how it's about it. So you can show a film that is so either saccharine or the way it's presented about something turns you off. There's some religious films like that people in the general population just won't watch because of the way they're presented. And so we say, when I choose this film, is it one that the audience is going to, you know, it can be a person who maybe years ago we would have shown the film and people wouldn't have picked up on the fact that maybe something is stigmatizing a mental disorder. Yeah. Now we're more aware of that. But it's really hard to balance sometimes some films that we love, and then you look at them with a new, when you're woke and you look at it with a new eye, and you think, oh my God, is it okay? So every year when we're putting the festival together, we try to think about it. And so what Nate and I say is people are, you know, mainly adults come to this festival, and we have discussions about them afterwards, and we have panels. So it's okay to show some films that got 4 stars from Roger. Maybe today, maybe he wouldn't give some of them 4 stars, but I just want you to know that we are cognizant about things as we're putting the festival together, and I'm glad that you have these discussions. And thank you, Dr. Pearson, for leading it.
Thank you. You have a question?
Hi, I'm not in the movie industry or anything, but I am blessed to be here. I'm a baby boomer, middle class, black man who didn't escape. So I've been in my community for over 60 years, seeing what was and where we come to. And the educators, I know you have a tough job. And by being in the communities and being here, I realized how important the film industry is to our growth. Because somebody said something about in school, movies in schools. I remember in the 60s, I would have never went and seen Sound of Music. They brought that to our school, we seen it, and to this day, it become one of my favorite movies. But I would have never went and seen it without it being brought to me. And then Sidney Poitier, Deserve Love, but we were talking about how we could collaborate and have all sorts of people be able to come and watch a movie. That means something to all of us. And so just being here and seeing everybody and listening to everybody, it's changed completely how I see, I guess, the future. And I think the film industry is going to be a large part of that. Because if we can bring those films like Julie and so into our schools, our younger people, we can bring them in high school and they'll go right over their head. But if we can educate our younger people and then talk about those films and talk about our history and what they meant, they will take that. And then they're so smart anyway, they'll go home, get their computer or laptop and go, oh, wow. And I think that's the way, through that education and through films, that I think we can reach them.
Yeah,
But thank you for allowing me to be here. I mean, this has been very special, and I could go on all day, but thanks for everything you guys are doing.
Thank you. Thank you.
You were talking about how movies affected your lives, and I have one that really affected mine. I was 12 years old. I was watching the best of MGM. And I was at my grandma's house because she let me stay up late. And the movie I'm talking about is The Heiress, the very last scene of The Heiress, where Montgomery Clift is banging on the door, and Olivia de Havilland takes that lamp and slowly walks up the stairs with this determination. And I thought, gee, when I date a guy, if he isn't good to me, I'm just gonna walk away. And you know, I've been married for 45 years to a terrific guy, and I credit that movie for saving me a lot of grief in my life.
Saved your head, huh?
Years later, I read Henry James' novel, The Heiress, and that impact where she leaves is not the same as in film. Because in film, you see that determination she has as she walks up those stairs. So I just had to share that with you.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's true. It's true.
Hi, I'd like to thank you also. This panel's been amazing. And my question to each of you is, what kinds of resources do you use or do you share with people in order to know which movies to use in the classroom? I know one of the issues that we tend to have is we have incredibly great movies, but the difficulty in getting it into the hands of teachers and kids and families. So if you can share your resources.
Well, in terms of film courses at the university, at the at the lower levels where there's their introductory courses that are required by departments, there's usually some larger discussion that goes on. There'll be a faculty member with teaching assistants, and together, usually with more input from the faculty member, they'll work out an arrangement of a schedule that sort of hits a lot of different points, allows a lot of different entries into the discussion of film. In upper level courses, it's going to be it's going to depend on the instructor and the sorts of directions he or she wants to take that course in. So, so it's going to depend on the direction of the course, the instructor's background, and what he or she wants the students to come away with at the end of the course.
I have a question. Do you screen in an auditorium or in the classroom? Because it makes a big difference
Oh,
how
yeah.
you receive the
Again,
film.
that depends usually on the enrollment in the course. So say if it's an introductory course that has 6 sections of 30 students each, they'll look at the film together in a large auditorium. If it's a small course with, say, 20 to 35 students, it's going to be in a classroom.
Yeah.
And of course that was before I retired. So now I think maybe it's all online.
Yeah, it is. But you're right. It's your question goes to resource. It's just I wish I could clear my schedule to write a book for particularly high school teachers to use film effectively, because I think that one of the things I've noticed when I talk to high school teachers is the breadth of the films that they think about when they're trying to deal with a specific issue is small. And what would be great is a textbook that says you can go back beyond 1980 to think about a film that might help you with this issue. And it's just something that needs to be done, but my plate is full. So we'll take 2 more questions and we'll wrap it up. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I would say that.
Oh, there's a third person. Oh, okay.
I have more of a comment to add to the discussion rather than a question. You're talking about bringing film to clients. I'm a therapist, and it works reverse for me. My clients bring the films, the concept of the films, what it means to them in discussion. And so when they're trying to express a feeling or a situation or where they're at, they will often refer to a scene from a movie. In fact, one the other day referred to Big Lebowski, which I haven't seen yet, but I will. But mostly when they refer, like, remember the scene in The Godfather? Well, that's how I felt. And so what I love about all this and what you're doing is that it gives my clients a language and words to express themselves when they don't have the words to articulate. And then we both know what that might have felt like. So it's a way of communicating in terms of the mental health feeling that I find remarkable. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
No.
And I would agree with that also as a therapist doing that. It connects us to our clients.
Relating to the points that Dr. Pearson and Chaz made about older films and how we learn new things all the time, you've given some good examples, but there's so many bad examples of mental illness in films, deranged killers, a lot of them, and also what I think annoys me even more, the cute crazy person, and how it's just so adorable how crazy they are. So I thought I would ask you if you could eliminate one stereotype of mental illness from media, what it might be.
I don't think we have a time. So, to me, it's the deranged, crazy person. And also, every time, in the media where there has been a shooting, especially if it's a white guy, it's because he's mentally ill, and that's not okay.
And any characterization of PTSD that frequently just doesn't accurately reflect the realities of people, but also creates such a stigma for people seeking help, talking about it, narrating their stories. And then the last thing, I can't think of many movies that have reflected bipolar disorder in a way that feels honest. And so I wish that it just, if you can't do it right, I prefer you just to not talk about it.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's it. Last question.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for contributing to this topic of inclusion. My question is, where do we see the evolution of film and television where writers with disabilities and disorders are going to be just seen and heard? I have a daughter who's almost 20 now, and she's been writing since she was 6 years old. And she's written a bunch of books and some screenplays and stuff like that. But it's just now that I'm starting to see like people representing her on the spectrum in movies and television, you know, such as The Good Doctor or on Sesame Street. So where do you see that movement for more writers? Because I meet writers all the time who have disabilities, and where do you see that coming in the future?
Well, I think what you mentioned is a lot of it is visibility, because I think visibility creates understanding. And we've come a long way. It's always been going back to, there are not enough black images in television. We've always sort of understood that visibility helps to create understanding. The more we see people in different situations, different circumstances, we understand, we take a little bit more of an understanding of what the world might be like for them. And I think if we just keep doing that, I know, and it's slow though. I mean, that's the frustrating part. Like, how long is it going to take us to get there? But I will say that, we're closer than we were 20 years ago, and maybe 5 years from now we'll be even closer. We just have to, and I think, as long as we have moments like this where we can all come together and talk about it, and then we take that energy out and make choices about what we see and what we support and those kinds of things, I think those things will change. I want to thank the panel for being with us this morning. I also wanted to, again, remind you of the pamphlet, but alert you to the art sale tomorrow starting at 11 o'clock. So it'll be outside of the theater on the plaza. So that'll be from 11 till 6 tomorrow. So I want to encourage you to participate in that. So we're gonna leave the stage, and the other people are gonna come up, and we're gonna transition. A photo? Absolutely. Okay. So we're just going to stay, if you guys just want to